My name is Dr. Eleanor Vance, and for the entirety of my 47 years, the world, for me, had been a closed system, governed by immutable laws, observable phenomena, and the elegant, cold precision of scientific inquiry. Faith, in any traditional sense, was a concept I regarded with a mixture of intellectual disdain and a kind of detached anthropological curiosity. It was a crutch for the weak-minded, a comforting illusion for those unable to face the stark, unadorned reality of a universe indifferent to human desire, a universe that began with a bang and would end, eventually, in the heat death of cosmic entropy. My parents, both academics, had instilled in me a rigorous skepticism from an early age. Dinner table conversations revolved around peer-reviewed journals, the scientific method, and the latest breakthroughs in astrophysics or evolutionary biology, not around parables or prayers. The notion of a personal deity, an intervening consciousness that had somehow engineered the cosmos and now listened to the individual pleas of billions of its inhabitants, struck me as not only improbable but frankly absurd. My life was built on evidence, on provable facts, on the tangible. I was a theoretical physicist, my days spent wrestling with the grand equations that described the universe, seeking to unravel its deepest secrets through mathematics and observation. There was a profound beauty in that pursuit, a sense of awe in the face of cosmic complexity, but it was an awe rooted in understanding, not in worship. The universe was magnificent, precisely because it wasn't designed by a mind. It simply was, a breathtaking accident of quantum fluctuations and emergent properties. I often debated with colleagues or friends who held even vaguely spiritual beliefs, not aggressively, but with a kind of patient exasperation. I would lay out the arguments, the lack of empirical evidence, the problem of evil, the psychological roots of religious belief, the historical abuses committed in the name of various gods. For me, atheism wasn't a belief system in itself. It was the default position, the logical conclusion of a rational mind unburdened by superstition or wishful thinking. I found solace not in a higher power, but in the power of human intellect, in our capacity to understand, to explore, to create meaning in a meaningless universe. Love, compassion, ethics. These were not divinely ordained, but emergent properties of complex social animals, evolved strategies for cooperation and survival, refined by culture and reason. And yet, if I were to be scrupulously honest, a habit I prided myself on, there were moments, rare and fleeting, usually late at night, when the house was still, and the vastness of the cosmos pressed in through my study window, when a peculiar sort of ache would surface. It wasn't a longing for a god, not consciously anyway, but perhaps a whisper of something more, an unarticulated sense that, for all its elegant equations, my understanding of reality felt somehow incomplete, like a beautiful but ultimately sterile blueprint. I would quickly dismiss these feelings as a residue of human evolutionary programming, the brain's innate tendency to seek patterns and agency where none existed. My life was full, a challenging career, a loving, if equally skeptical, partner named Thomas, 2 bright children navigating their own paths, a comfortable home, intellectual stimulation. What more could one reasonably ask for? The universe owed us nothing, and expecting more was a fool's errand. I was content, or so I told myself, grounded in the bedrock of reason, secure in my understanding of a world without gods or ghosts, a world where death was simply the cessation of consciousness, a final, unceremonious full stop. The idea of an afterlife was, to me, the ultimate fantasy, a childish refusal to accept the inevitable. Little did I know that the very foundations of my carefully constructed, rational world were about to be subjected to an experiment far beyond any I could have conceived. an experience that would shatter my certainties and force me to confront a reality I had spent a lifetime denying with every fiber of my intellectual being. The precipitating crisis, when it came, was mundane in its origins, almost insultingly so for someone who contemplated cosmic cataclysms for a living. It wasn't a meteor strike or a quantum anomaly, but a patch of black ice on a suburban street on a cold January morning. I was driving to a conference, my mind preoccupied with the keynote speech I was due to deliver on the inconsistencies in certain inflationary models of the early universe. The lecture notes lay on the passenger seat, a testament to hours of meticulous research and carefully constructed arguments. One moment, I was navigating a familiar curve, the tires gripping the asphalt with comforting predictability. The next, the world tilted, a sickening lurch, as the car lost traction. Spinning with a horrifying, frictionless ease, time seemed to stretch and distort. I remember the metallic shriek of tortured steel, the explosive shattering of glass, the brutal, concussive force of impact as the world dissolved into a chaotic, tumbling vortex of noise and pain. My thoughts, usually so ordered, so analytical, became a jumbled mess of pure, primal terror. There was no intellectual processing, no rational assessment of the situation, only the raw, animalistic instinct to survive, an instinct that was rapidly being overwhelmed by the sheer violence of the event. I recall a searing agony in my chest, a feeling like my ribs were being crushed by an invisible vice, and a desperate, futile struggle for breath. The air, just moments before so freely available, became an elusive, precious commodity. My carefully constructed worldview, my atheistic certainties, offered no comfort, no framework for what was happening. There was no thought of a deity to call upon, no ingrained prayers to utter. My mind, in its final flickering moments of coherence, could only register the cold, hard fact of its own impending annihilation. This is it, a detached part of my brain observed with chilling clarity. Cessation, oblivion. The thought was not accompanied by peace or acceptance, but by a profound, terrifying sense of waste, of unfulfilled potential, of arguments left unmade, of love left inadequately expressed. The darkness began to encroach from the periphery of my vision, a physical manifestation of the encroaching void. The pain, which had been so all-consuming, started to recede, replaced by a strange floating numbness. The frantic sounds of the crash, the screeching, the tearing, the impact, faded into a dull, rhythmic thumping, which I dimly recognized as the failing efforts of my own heart. There was a brief, almost regretful sense of the universe continuing without me, the stars burning, the galaxies spinning, indifferent to the extinguishing of one small, insignificant spark of consciousness on a minor planet. And then the thumping stopped, the darkness became absolute. Silence, nothingness. Just as I had always intellectually predicted, always rationally expected, except it wasn't. The transition was not into the blank, featureless oblivion I had so confidently anticipated. Instead, after a period of what felt like utter sensory deprivation, a timeless moment of pure non-being, a new form of awareness began to dawn, subtle at first, then with increasing, bewildering clarity. I was somewhere, and I could perceive, but the perception was unlike anything my earthly senses had ever processed. I found myself looking down, as if from a vantage point just above and slightly to the side, at a scene of horrific wreckage. A car, mangled almost beyond recognition, was wrapped around a sturdy oak tree by the side of the road. Steam or smoke wisped from its crumpled hood. And inside, slumped grotesquely over the steering wheel, was a figure. With a jolt that transcended any physical sensation, I recognized the tailored coat, the fall of dark hair, the unnaturally still posture. It was me. Doctor. Eleanor Vance, theoretical physicist, staunch atheist, lay broken and lifeless in the driver's seat. I should have been consumed by horror, by grief, by an existential terror beyond imagining. But instead, a profound, almost shocking sense of detachment enveloped me. There was no pain, no fear, no emotional turmoil. It was as if I were watching a particularly tragic, but ultimately impersonal news report. That crumpled form down there, that was merely a vessel, a sophisticated biological machine that had ceased to function. The eye that was observing, the core of my consciousness, was somehow separate, untouched, and strangely, serenely calm. I tried to move, to interact, to understand the mechanics of this new, disembodied state, but I had no limbs to command, no muscles to flex. I was a point of awareness, pure and simple, capable of observation and thought, but seemingly without physical agency. The sounds of the world below reached me, but they were muted, distorted, as if filtered through a thick layer of cotton. I could hear the distant wail of sirens, growing closer, the anxious shouts of a passerby who had stopped his car and was now fumbling with a mobile phone. These sounds, which should have signaled urgency, rescue, perhaps a chance for that broken body below, registered with a strange lack of emotional resonance. It was then that the atmosphere around me began to change. The initial calmness, the sense of detached observation, started to erode, replaced by a growing, deeply unsettling unease. The air, if it could be called that in this strange, non-physical state, grew heavy, oppressive. A coldness, far more profound than the January morning chill, seeped into my awareness, a spiritual chill that touched the very essence of my being. And then I perceived them. They weren't visible in the way the car or the trees were visible, not defined by light and shadow, but as disturbances in the very fabric of this new reality, like denser patches of the encroaching gloom. They were shadows, but not mere absences of light. They were entities of darkness, amorphous, shifting, their forms subtly writhing, coalescing, and dispersing like smoke in a still room. They emanated an aura of profound negativity, a palpable sense of ancient malice, of hunger, of utter despair. My intellectual framework, my lifetime of rationalism, offered no category for these beings. They were not a product of a dying brain, for my brain was clearly down there, inoperative. They were not a psychological projection, for my emotional state had been one of calm detachment. They were objectively, terrifyingly real. They seemed drawn to the scene of the accident, to the residue of trauma, to the recently vacated shell of my physical body. But more than that, they seemed aware of me, of my disembodied consciousness. Their attention, if such a word could apply, focused on me with a predatory intensity. I felt a pull, not a physical force, but a psychic magnetism, a terrifying suction towards them, towards the bleak, joyless, loveless reality they embodied. Whispers, not in any language I knew, but in a chorus of sibilant, insinuating sounds that bypassed the ears and scraped directly against my consciousness, began to fill the void. They spoke of emptiness, of futility, of the ultimate meaninglessness of existence, concepts that, ironically, had once formed the bedrock of my atheistic worldview, but now, emanating from these beings, carried a chilling, soul-destroying resonance. The abstract, intellectual nihilism I had once espoused was now being presented to me as a lived, eternal reality, and it was horrifying. Fear, a primal, soul-deep terror, unlike anything I had ever known or could have imagined, began to grip me. This wasn't the fear of physical pain or death. That body below was beyond such concerns. This was the fear of spiritual annihilation, of being absorbed into this cold, malevolent darkness, of an eternity of conscious despair. My atheism, My confident assertion that death was simply oblivion offered no defense, no comfort, no explanation for this. Oblivion would have been a mercy. This was something else, something far, far worse. I tried to resist, to pull away from their encroaching presence, from their psychic gravity, but I had no agency, no spiritual muscles to flex. I was adrift, vulnerable, a naked consciousness exposed to forces beyond my comprehension. Just as the nearest of these shadowy forms seemed to solidify, to reach out with a tendril of what felt like solidified despair, intending to engulf me, a change occurred, so sudden, so unexpected. It was like a cosmic switch being thrown. A light. It began as an infinitesimal pinprick in the far distance of this strange non-physical dimension, a tiny spark of impossible brilliance against the encroaching, oppressive gloom. But it was a light unlike any I had ever conceived. It wasn't the harsh, analytical light of a laboratory, nor the distant, indifferent light of stars. This light was alive. It pulsed with an incredible, unimaginable warmth, a warmth that was not thermal but spiritual, a warmth that felt like pure, unadulterated, unconditional love. As this light began to expand, rapidly, exponentially, the shadowy entities recoiled with what I could only perceive as expressions of pain and terror. They hissed and writhed, their dark forms shrinking, dissolving, unable to bear the purity, the sheer intensity of this burgeoning radiance. The oppressive coldness they had brought with them was instantly banished, replaced by this incredible, life-affirming warmth. The psychic pull towards the darkness was broken, shattered, and in its place, I felt a new, infinitely more powerful magnetism, a gentle yet irresistible drawing towards the heart of this magnificent, welcoming light, an overwhelming sense of relief, so profound it felt like my very essence was unclenching after an eternity of tension washed through me. The soul-deep fear vanished as if it had never been, replaced by an incredible, unshakable sense of safety, of peace, of coming home. The chaotic scene of the accident below, the wreckage, my broken body, the retreating, vanquished shadows, all began to fade into utter insignificance as I was drawn, gently but inexorably, joyfully, towards the source of this glorious, beckoning, all-consuming light. It was a journey not through space as I understood it, but a transition into a higher, more luminous state of being, towards a reality that my previous atheistic, materialistic worldview could not even begin to accommodate, yet which now felt more real, more fundamental than anything I had ever known. The light was all-encompassing, a boundless ocean of ineffable warmth and profound serenity. As I was drawn deeper into its embrace, the last vestiges of the earthly realm, the muted sounds of approaching sirens, the distant image of my crumpled car, receded like a fading dream, losing all significance, all emotional hold over me. There was no sensation of travel through physical space, no perception of distance covered in any conventional sense, only a continuous, joyful immersion into this radiant, living presence. It wasn't merely a visual phenomenon. I could feel it, as if the light itself was composed of pure, unconditional, creative love seeping into the very core of my disembodied consciousness, gently healing spiritual wounds I hadn't even been aware I carried, dissolving lifetimes of ingrained skepticism and intellectual pride. The peace was absolute, a stillness so profound, so complete, that it quieted every lingering fear, every nascent question, every faint, residual echo of the turmoil and terror I had so recently experienced. It was a peace that surpassed all understanding, a peace that was understanding itself. Within this incredible, pulsating luminosity, a distinct form began to coalesce, or rather to emerge organically from the light, as if it were both the light's ultimate source and its most perfect, individualized expression. It was a figure, recognizably humanoid in shape, yet radiating a gentle majesty and an intrinsic loving power that transcended any possible human description or artistic representation. His features were not sharp or easily defined in a physical sense, as if they were sculpted from the very substance of the light itself, yet they conveyed an infinite intelligence, an unsearchable wisdom, and a boundless tender compassion that were utterly, breathtakingly overwhelming. His eyes, if they could be called such, for they seemed more like windows into an infinite ocean of love, appeared to hold the accumulated wisdom of ages, the loving understanding of every soul's journey. And as his gaze, his loving awareness, met mine, I felt truly seen, completely known, for the very first time in my existence, not just my external actions or my intellectual achievements, but the deepest, most hidden chambers of my soul, my unspoken fears, my unacknowledged longings, my most carefully guarded vulnerabilities. And in that all-encompassing gaze, there was not a scintilla of judgment, not a shadow of condemnation, only an infinite, unwavering, unconditional love, a love so potent, so pure, so utterly real, that it dwarfed every other experience, every other emotion I had ever known. I had no doubt, not a flicker of intellectual uncertainty, not a moment of rational hesitation about who stood before me. The name, the identity, resonated in the very core of my spirit without a single word needing to be spoken or heard. It was him, Jesus, the Christ. The figure I had dismissed as a myth, a historical legend, a projection of human hope and fear. The one whose followers I had often regarded with a kind of pitying condescension. And here he was, more real, more present, more overwhelmingly loving than reality itself. An awe, so profound it was almost unbearable in its intensity, washed over me, through me. I felt an instinctive, irresistible urge to bow, to prostrate my spiritual self, not out of fear or servile obligation, but out of an overwhelming, spontaneous cascade of reverence, humility, and profound unworthiness in the face of such unimaginable purity, such boundless, selfless love. Eleanor, his voice. It was not a sound that vibrated through any physical medium, for there was no air to carry it, no ears for me to hear in the conventional sense. It was a direct, telepathic communication, a knowing, a truth that bloomed instantaneously, luminously, within the deepest recesses of my consciousness, clearer, more resonant, more profoundly meaningful than any spoken word could ever be. His voice was indescribably gentle, yet it carried an intrinsic, undeniable authority, the authority of ultimate truth, of infinite love. The sound of my own name, Eleanor, spoken by him, felt like a divine benediction, a sacred affirmation of my individual existence, a loving recognition that washed away any lingering sense of cosmic insignificance or existential dread. Before I could even begin to formulate a coherent response, a single thought, a hesitant question, the experience shifted once more, seamlessly, effortlessly. The ambient light around us, his light, seemed to transform, to become a living canvas, a boundless holographic display, and upon it, with breathtaking clarity and detail, my entire life began to unfold. It wasn't like watching a detached movie of my past. It was far more immersive, more profound. It was as if I was reliving every significant moment, yet simultaneously observing it from a higher, objective perspective, endowed with a complete, compassionate understanding of all contributing factors. Every event, from my earliest childhood memories, the feel of my mother's hand, the scent of rain on summer asphalt, the sting of a childhood injustice, the thrill of an intellectual discovery, through my academic pursuits, my relationships, my moments of quiet satisfaction, and my instances of unacknowledged frustration, right up to my final, fatal charge into that mundane patch of black ice, was replayed with an almost unbearable, yet ultimately liberating, honesty. I saw myself as a child, insatiably curious, already questioning, already seeking to understand the how and why of the world, shaped by the intellectual climate of my home, by the love, and also the limitations of my parents. I witnessed my youthful embrace of scientific rationalism, my passionate rejection of anything that smacked of superstition or unprovable faith. I saw the pride I had taken in my intellect, the subtle sense of superiority I had sometimes felt towards those who held what I considered to be irrational beliefs. The life review was unflinchingly, relentlessly honest, yet it was entirely devoid of condemnation. As I re-experienced my life, Jesus stood beside me, or rather, his loving, understanding presence enveloped me. I was able to perceive not only my own actions and words, but also the hidden motivations, the unconscious fears, the unacknowledged needs that had driven them. More than that, I was made acutely aware of the impact, both positive and negative, that my life, my choices, my very presence had had on everyone I had ever interacted with. I felt the fleeting moments of kindness I had shown, and the warmth they had generated in others. I also felt, with a pang of deep, sorrowful regret, the unintended hurt caused by a dismissive remark, the missed opportunity to offer comfort or understanding, the subtle ways my own intellectual arrogance might have alienated or belittled someone. The review particularly highlighted my persistent, lifelong denial of any spiritual dimension to reality. I saw myself engaging in debates, confidently asserting the non-existence of God, dismantling religious arguments with what I believed to be irrefutable logic. There was no anger or judgment from Jesus as these scenes played out, only a profound, loving sadness, as if a parent were watching a beloved child stubbornly refuse a precious gift. I saw the countless moments when an intuitive prompting, a whisper of deeper meaning, a fleeting sense of wonder that transcended the purely material, had brushed against my consciousness, only to be swiftly, almost reflexively, dismissed by my conditioned, rational mind as sentimentality or neurological artifact. These were moments when grace had gently knocked at the door of my awareness, and I had, in my intellectual certainty, refused to answer. And through this entire, overwhelming, revelatory process, his presence was a constant and unwavering beacon of unconditional love and infinite patience, allowing me to see myself, my entire life, with all its complexities, its triumphs, its failures, its unacknowledged longings, as I truly was, in the pure, unfiltered, and ultimately merciful light of his eternal truth. It was the most humbling, and simultaneously the most liberating experience imaginable. The life review continued, peeling back layer after intricate layer of self-deception, ingrained habit, and intellectual pride, delving deeper not just into my outward actions and spoken words, but into the very fabric of my most cherished beliefs, the hidden motivations of my heart, and the true, often unacknowledged, state of my soul. It was an unsparingly thorough, yet profoundly compassionate spiritual examination, akin to a divine surgeon meticulously, lovingly excising all that was false, all that was a barrier to truth, all that was not aligned with the eternal principles of love and interconnectedness. I saw myself in innumerable moments of what could only be described as intellectual arrogance, times when the thrill of a well-reasoned argument or the satisfaction of dismantling another's belief system had taken precedence over simple human kindness or empathy. I had often wielded my intellect like a weapon, not always consciously intending to wound, but certainly not always mindful of the potential for collateral damage to another's spirit or deeply held convictions. These were not necessarily overt acts of cruelty, but rather subtle instances of looking down upon those whose understanding of the universe differed from my own, of choosing the cold satisfaction of being right over the warm, unifying embrace of shared humanity. I witnessed the profound spiritual aridity that had characterized so much of my inner life, despite its outward appearance of intellectual richness and professional success. My confident atheism, which I had worn like a badge of honor and rationality, now appeared, in this divine light, as a self-imposed limitation, a refusal to explore the vast, unseen territories of the spirit that lay just beyond the narrow confines of my five senses and my logical constructs. His presence beside me throughout this intense process was a constant, unwavering source of unutterable love, yet this divine love did not shield me from the acute, piercing pain of these realizations. It was a purifying, transformative pain, born not of external condemnation from him, but of my own dawning, clear-sighted understanding of where I had fallen so tragically short of the divine potential that he had lovingly woven into the very essence of my being. He was meticulously, patiently showing me the unvarnished truth of my heart, the hidden, unlit corners where fear had masqueraded as intellectual rigor, where pride had presented itself as reasoned independence, or where a hardened skeptical spirit had systematically eclipsed my innate, God-given capacity for awe, for wonder, for faith, and for a love that transcended the purely human. Then, the specific focus of the life review shifted subtly yet significantly to my consistent denial of his existence and the broader spiritual implications of such a stance. I saw myself at various stages of my life, from university student to established physicist, confidently articulating the arguments for atheism. I witnessed myself dismissing religious experiences reported by others as anecdotal, as psychological phenomena, or as wishful thinking. There was no anger in Jesus' presence as these scenes unfolded. No, I told you so. Instead, I perceived a profound, loving sorrow, the kind a parent might feel watching a beloved child stubbornly refuse to open their eyes to a beautiful sunrise, convinced that only darkness exists because they have chosen not to see. The central divine figure, Jesus, then began to impart specific, profound revelations, not through didactic pronouncements or theological arguments, for he knew my mind was already overfull of those, but through a direct, luminous infusion of intuitive understanding that bypassed my limited human intellect entirely and resonated with irrefutable truth deep within my soul. He showed me the true nature of faith, not as a blind, irrational assent to unprovable doctrines, nor as an emotional crutch, but as a courageous, open-hearted willingness to trust in a reality that transcends the purely material, a conscious choice to align oneself with the eternal vibrations of love, wisdom, and creative power that orchestrate the cosmos. He revealed with breathtaking clarity that his primary concern was not with my intellectual acceptance of his existence, nor with my adherence to any specific religious dogma or ritual, but with the fundamental orientation of my heart, with the degree to which I had cultivated and genuinely expressed selfless love, compassion, and kindness towards my fellow beings during my fleeting earthly sojourn. Eleanor. His communication was indescribably gentle yet carried an undeniable and transformative divine weight. Your powerful intellect, your dedication to scientific truth, these were gifts, tools for exploration and understanding, but like any tool, they could be used to build walls as well as bridges. Your atheism, born from a sincere desire for empirical certainty, inadvertently became a wall, shielding you from the experiential knowing of my presence, from the boundless love that constantly sought to reach you. Visions then began to unfold with a vividness that surpassed any earthly reality, illustrating these profound spiritual truths. I saw the universe not as a cold, accidental machine, but as a vibrant, pulsating, infinitely intelligent and loving consciousness, a magnificent thought form in the mind of the divine. I witnessed the intricate, invisible web of light and love that connects all beings, all things, showing me that separation is an illusion, a trick of limited perception. I saw souls who had lived outwardly simple, even obscure lives of quiet, unassuming service, people who may have been uneducated or unsophisticated by worldly standards, yet they radiated a brilliant, dazzling inner light because their hearts were wide open, overflowing with pure love, genuine humility, and selfless, active compassion for all. Conversely, I saw others who had held positions of great earthly power, intellectual renown, and even prominent religious authority, who were outwardly respected, admired, and perhaps even envied, yet their spiritual forms appeared dim, constricted, flickering feebly, burdened by the invisible weight of unacknowledged pride, intellectual arrogance, spiritual complacency, and a profound, tragic lack of genuine, heartfelt compassion for their fellow human beings. It was a radical, stunning reordering of my entire lifelong value system, a complete inversion of my understanding of what constituted true worth, genuine intelligence, and ultimate importance. The deeply ingrained values of the world I had known and prized, intellectual achievement, professional status, empirical proof, rational skepticism, all seemed to fade into utter insignificance when compared to the simple, luminous, eternal truth of a loving, humble, open, and compassionate heart. He showed me with unequivocal, soul-shaking certainty that every single soul, without exception, was infinitely precious to him, uniquely beloved, and an integral, irreplaceable part of his divine being, regardless of their intellectual beliefs, their religious affiliations, or lack thereof, their race, their nationality, their social standing, or any other superficial, earthly distinction. This was a particularly staggering and deeply challenging revelation for me, Doctor. Eleanor Vance, the lifelong atheist, the proud rationalist, who had always placed such a high premium on intellectual understanding and empirical evidence as the sole arbiters of truth. The core teaching, often dismissed by me as sentimental or irrational, of loving one's neighbor as oneself, now resonated with a profound, undeniable cosmic logic. It wasn't merely a moral platitude. It was a fundamental law of spiritual reality, because, in the deepest sense, my neighbor was myself, another facet of the same divine diamond. The life review, I finally understood with every fiber of my transformed consciousness, wasn't a judgment in the punitive, condemning human sense of that word. It was far more akin to a divine, loving diagnostic, an infinitely merciful, honest, and meticulously thorough spiritual assessment designed to facilitate profound self-awareness, genuine healing, and ultimate joyful understanding. The overwhelming regret I felt for my past blindness and missed opportunities was not imposed upon me by him as a punishment. It arose naturally, spontaneously, from my own newfound, piercing clarity, from vividly seeing the vast, heartbreaking chasm between what I had been in my earthly ignorance and self-imposed limitations, and the boundless, radiant, loving being I was always created and intended to be. His divine purpose, I saw with tear-filled spiritual eyes, was not to shame or diminish me, but to awaken me from my long slumber of disbelief, to purify my heart of its accumulated dross, to heal my soul of its self-inflicted wounds, and to prepare me for a deeper, more complete, and infinitely more joyful understanding of the eternal spiritual realities that underpinned all existence. And as this illuminating, life-altering phase of the life review concluded, I felt stripped bare of all pretense, all ego, all intellectual defenses, all illusion, yet strangely, incredibly, miraculously hopeful, receptive, and profoundly, humbly ready to receive whatever further truths He, in his infinite, unsearchable mercy and wisdom, wished to impart to my waiting, transformed soul. The immensity of the light, his light, seemed to deepen, to become even more vibrant, more alive, and with it, my capacity for understanding, for receiving truth, expanded further, as if my very consciousness, once so rigidly defined, was being gently, lovingly stretched to accommodate truths and realities too vast, too glorious for my former earthly mind to have ever contained. The central divine figure, Jesus, began to unveil with even greater clarity the intricate, often hidden, spiritual realities that lay behind the frequently deceptive curtain of the physical world. He focused particularly on the profound yearning for meaning, for connection, for love that exists, often unacknowledged, within every human heart, regardless of their outward beliefs or disbeliefs. It was as if I were being granted a privileged, compassionate glimpse into the collective soul of humanity, with all its hidden pain, its secret hopes, and its deep, intrinsic longing for the divine, whether consciously recognized or vehemently denied. He showed me, with a tender, almost heartbreaking understanding, how the very atheism I had so fiercely embraced was, in many ways, itself a cry of the heart, a protest against suffering, injustice, and the apparent silence of a God I couldn't perceive through my chosen instruments of understanding. He didn't condemn my skepticism, rather, he illuminated its deeper roots, perhaps a fear of disappointment, a shield against the pain of a seemingly indifferent universe, or an intellectual defense against the vulnerability that true faith often requires. He revealed that even in my most strident denials, a part of my soul had always been searching, always been reaching, albeit blindly, for the very source I was intellectually rejecting. Eleanor. His communication flowed into me, not as words, but as a wave of pure, loving understanding. The void you perceived in the universe, the meaninglessness you so eloquently argued for, was but a reflection of a void you carried within your own heart, a space designed for me that you had tried, with great intellectual effort, to fill with other things. But that space can only truly be filled by the love that created it. Visions then unfolded, not of grand cosmic events, but of intimate human moments. I saw people in deep prayer, not just in churches or temples, but in hospital rooms, in quiet moments of desperation, in joyful expressions of gratitude. Their prayers ascended like streams of light, regardless of the specific deity they addressed or the particular rituals they followed. He showed me that the sincerity of the heart, the genuine yearning for connection, was what mattered most to him, far more than the correctness of theological formulations. He then addressed the problem of suffering, a cornerstone of my atheistic arguments. He didn't offer simplistic platitudes or easy answers. Instead, he showed me, through a series of deeply moving spiritual insights, how suffering, in the complex tapestry of soul evolution, could serve as a catalyst for growth, for compassion, for the awakening of the soul to deeper realities. He revealed that he was not a distant, aloof creator, indifferent to our pain, but an immanent presence, suffering with us, in us, always seeking to bring healing and redemption out of even the darkest experiences. This was a radical shift from my perception of a detached, non-existent God. I do not cause suffering, Eleanor, he conveyed with profound empathy, for my nature is only love and goodness. Suffering arises from the misuse of free will, from ignorance of spiritual laws, and from the inherent conditions of a world of duality and separation. But I am always present within the suffering, offering strength, comfort, and the opportunity to transform it into wisdom and compassion. No tear is unseen, no pain unfelt by me. He showed me how acts of selfless love, kindness, and forgiveness, even small, seemingly insignificant ones, generated powerful waves of positive spiritual energy that counteracted the darkness and contributed to the healing of the world. He revealed that every soul has a unique purpose, a unique set of lessons to learn and gifts to share, and that my own intellectual gifts, once I understood their true source and potential, could be used not to deny his existence, but to help others understand the intricate, beautiful harmony between true science and true spirituality. The apparent conflict between science and religion, he showed me, was an artificial construct born of limited human understanding on both sides. True science, pursued with humility and openness, was a method of exploring the physical manifestation of his creative intelligence. True spirituality was the experiential knowing of his loving presence. There was no inherent contradiction, only a failure of human beings to see the larger, unified picture. This understanding was profoundly liberating. My lifelong love for science was not invalidated. It was recontextualized, elevated, given a deeper, more sacred meaning. My intellect was not an enemy of faith, but a potential instrument for it, once purified of pride and skepticism. He then showed me the immense, often unseen, spiritual support that surrounds every human being, guides, angels, loved ones who have passed on, all part of his vast network of love, always seeking to assist, to comfort, to guide, though never to interfere with free will. My staunch belief in a purely material existence had rendered me blind and deaf to these subtle, loving presences. The feeling of cosmic loneliness, the existential dread of being a mere accident in an indifferent universe, which had subtly underpinned my atheism, dissolved in the radiant certainty of this all-encompassing, infinitely caring, spiritual reality. He was not asking me to abandon my intellect, but to expand it, to open it to dimensions of reality that could not be measured by my current scientific instruments, but could be known, with absolute certainty, through the awakened heart and the illumined soul. As these profound, paradigm-shattering revelations settled within my transformed consciousness, I felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude, humility, and a burgeoning, joyful desire to understand my own unique place, my own potential contribution in this magnificent, loving, divine order. The intellectual frameworks of my past were not so much destroyed as they were lovingly dismantled and then reassembled into a far grander, more beautiful, and infinitely more coherent structure of understanding, one in which reason and faith, science and spirit, dance together in perfect, harmonious union. The dialogue with the central divine figure, Jesus, then became even more direct, more intensely personal, as I, or rather the transformed consciousness that was Eleanor Vance, struggled to fully assimilate the sheer vastness and the radical, life-altering implications of what I was being shown and taught. My mind, though expanded and illuminated, still bore the imprint of its earthly patterns of linear thought and logical reasoning, and it grappled with the apparent paradoxes and the overwhelming scale of the divine plan he was revealing. But my life, the question, the statement, the lament, formed in the very core of my being, not as a challenge to his infinite wisdom or goodness, but as a poignant expression of dawning regret and a desperate plea for deeper, more personal understanding. I spent so much of it denying you, arguing against your existence, even pitying those who believed. How can this be? How can your love extend even to someone like me, someone who so willfully chose blindness? His response was not a recitation of theological arguments or a demand for intellectual capitulation, but an enveloping wave of pure, unconditional, all-forgiving love, a love that melted away the last vestiges of my intellectual pride and my fear of judgment. It was an experiential answer that transcended all words. Eleanor. His communication flowed into me, as gentle as a summer breeze, yet as powerful as a cosmic ocean. My love is not conditional upon belief. It is the very fabric of existence. It is the air you breathe, the light by which you see, even when you deny its source. I have always known your heart, its sincere search for truth, even when that search led you down paths that seemed to move away from me. Your intellect, your skepticism, these were never barriers to my love, only veils you yourself had placed over your own eyes. And even through those veils, my light was always seeking to penetrate, to warm, to awaken. This concept of a love that pre-existed and transcended intellectual assent was utterly revolutionary to me. I had always assumed that faith was a prerequisite for divine favor, a kind of entry ticket into the spiritual realm. To learn that his love was a constant, unwavering, universal given, regardless of one's beliefs or disbeliefs, shattered the very foundations of my previous understanding of religion and divinity. And the suffering in the world? I pressed, the age-old question that had been a cornerstone of my atheistic stance. The innocent who perish, the seemingly senseless tragedies, the unanswered prayers. If your love is so pervasive, so powerful, why does such darkness persist? Eleanor, I have shown you that I am not a distant puppeteer, arbitrarily pulling the strings of fate. He conveyed with infinite patience and profound empathy. The world you experienced is a realm of growth, of learning, of soul evolution, a schoolhouse where consequences follow choices, where the misuse of free will by some can tragically impact others. The darkness you perceive is not my creation. It is the shadow cast by souls temporarily forgetful of their own divine nature, by the collective accumulation of fear, ignorance, and choices made out of alignment with love. My role is not to forcibly prevent all suffering by revoking free will, for to do so would be to negate the very possibility of genuine love and conscious growth, but to be an unceasing presence of love, comfort, and strength within the suffering, to offer pathways to healing and redemption, and to ultimately bring good out of even the most tragic circumstances, often in ways that are not immediately apparent to the limited human perspective. The prayers of a sincere heart are never unanswered, though the answers may not always come in the form or the timing that the human ego expects or demands. Trust, Eleanor, is the key that unlocks the perception of my constant, loving intervention. He then imparted, with a clarity and urgency that resonated through every fiber of my spiritual being, the core of the specific message he wished for me to understand with every facet of my transformed consciousness, and which he was now gently but firmly commissioning me, in my own unique way, to carry back and share with a world desperately, though often unconsciously, thirsting for it. It was a message of radical, all-inclusive, unconditional divine love, a love that actively seeks out the lost, that embraces the doubter, that yearns for the return of every prodigal soul. It was a clarion call for all humanity, especially for those who, like my former self, had become lost in the labyrinth of intellectualism or disillusioned by the failings of institutionalized religion, to awaken from their slumber of spiritual skepticism, to dare to open their hearts to the possibility of a loving, personal, divine, and to recognize the profound, unbreakable, spiritual interconnectedness that binds all beings together as one family. The greatest, most fundamental truth of existence, the truth upon which all other spiritual realities depend, he emphasized, his divine essence glowing with an even greater, more brilliant, more loving intensity that filled my entire awareness, is love. Love is who I am. Love is who you, at your core, truly are. Love is the creative force of the universe. Love is the ultimate healer. Love is the only path to true, lasting joy and fulfillment. To love me, the source of all being, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength, is to align yourself with this fundamental reality. And Flowing inextricably, inevitably from that primary alignment, is the sacred imperative to love your neighbor, every single fellow being, without exception, without reservation, as you love your deepest, truest self. And understand this with all your being, Eleanor. Your neighbor is everyone. The atheist, the believer, the skeptic, the saint, the sinner, the one who loves you, the one who misunderstands you, even the one who might wish you harm. There are no exceptions, no outsiders, no others in my infinite, impartial, all-embracing love. Therefore, there should be none in yours, if you truly wish to walk in my way, to be an instrument of my peace, and to experience the fullness of life I intend for all my children. He showed me then, with vivid, heartbreaking, yet ultimately hopeful clarity, that true, lasting peace on earth, the peace that humanity so desperately craves and so consistently fails to achieve, would never, could never, be established through purely external means, whether military might, political treaties, economic systems, or even intellectual enlightenment alone. These outward structures and efforts, while potentially helpful, could, at best, create temporary cessations of overt hostility, fragile truces in an ongoing, deeply rooted war of hearts and minds. Lasting, genuine, transformative peace, he revealed with luminous certainty, could only be built upon the unshakable foundation of millions, even billions, of individually transformed human hearts, on a global, grassroots, spiritual upwelling of authentic compassion, radical forgiveness, profound mutual respect, and a lived, experiential understanding of our shared divinity and interconnectedness. Tell them, Eleanor. His divine directive was gentle in its tone, yet it was imbued with an undeniable, urgent spiritual imperative that resonated in the deepest core of my soul. Tell all who will listen, especially those who, like you once did, have closed their hearts to me out of intellectual pride, or fear, or disillusionment. Tell them that the path to true, enduring peace, both personal and collective, begins within the sacred, often neglected, sanctuary of each individual human soul. Tell them to first dare to lay down the insidious, invisible weapons of hatred, of judgment, of cynicism, of resentment, of fear that they carry so unknowingly, so unconsciously, so destructively within their own hearts and minds. Tell them that my love is real, more real than the air they breathe, that it is present always and everywhere, that it is more than sufficient, infinitely sufficient, to heal all wounds, to bridge all divides, to mend all brokenness, to illuminate all darkness. If only they will summon the courage to turn towards me, with even a flicker of sincerity, open their hearts just a crack, and allow my transforming grace and boundless love to flow through them, into their lives, and out into a waiting, wounded world. This message was so breathtakingly simple in its essence, yet so profoundly challenging in its implications, so radically countercultural, and so starkly at odds with the ingrained complexities, the cynical realpolitik, the competitive individualism, and the often brutal, materialistic realities of the world I had known and, in my own way, had participated in. It wasn't a new philosophical system or a complex political ideology. It was nothing less than an urgent, loving call for a global spiritual revolution, a quiet, powerful, irresistible revolution beginning silently, sacredly, transformatively, in the most sacred inner sanctum of each and every individual human heart. He then showed me, with a clarity that both humbled and inspired me, my own unique potential role in this grand divine endeavor, not as a dogmatic preacher or a theological scholar, for that was not my path, but as a humble, honest messenger, a relatable witness, a willing, albeit imperfect, conduit for this transformative love, a small, flickering light perhaps, but one capable of helping to illuminate the path for others who were still stumbling in the darkness of doubt, fear, or intellectual despair. The thought was simultaneously terrifying in its immense responsibility and profoundly exhilarating in its sacred, life-affirming potential. How could I, Dr. Eleanor Vance, the lifelong, articulate atheist, the embodiment of rational skepticism, presume to speak of such divine peace, such universal love, such transcendent spiritual realities? How could my voice, so long accustomed to the precise analytical language of scientific discourse and the confident deconstruction of religious claims, ever learn to effectively convey such a gentle, yet infinitely powerful, world-changing, heart-opening truth? His reassurance flowed into me instantly, powerfully, like a calming river of pure, liquid light, washing away my fears and insecurities. It is not by your own limited strength or intellectual prowess, Eleanor, but by mine flowing through you that this will be accomplished. Your unique experiences, your intellectual journey, even your past skepticism, have, in their own paradoxical way, prepared you specifically for this task. They have stripped away many common illusions. They have broken open your heart to new possibilities, and they have made you receptive to receive, and crucially, to share this truth in a way that others, particularly those who share your former mindset, might be willing to hear. Speak simply, honestly, courageously, what you have seen here, what you have profoundly felt in my presence, what you now know with an unshakable, experiential certainty in the deepest core of your being. The words, the opportunities, the strength, the wisdom, all will be given to you when they are needed. Trust in me. Trust in the power of the love you now carry. The sheer, almost unbearable responsibility of it all remained daunting, yet it was now inextricably mingled with an incredible, burgeoning sense of true, ultimate purpose. A purpose far greater, far more meaningful, far more aligned with the deepest, most authentic longings of my awakened soul than any I had ever known or even dared to imagine before. This was not just another intellectual challenge or a professional endeavor. It was a sacred, life-altering, soul-defining trust. The central divine figure, Jesus, then tenderly, lovingly conveyed that my time in this extraordinary realm of pure, unadulterated light and profound, direct, experiential understanding was, for now, drawing to an inevitable close. An immediate, almost visceral sense of profound, heartbreaking reluctance welled up within my consciousness, a spiritual ache of impending separation. Having experienced this sublime, transcendent state of absolute peace, unconditional love, and perfect, luminous clarity, the mere thought of returning to the broken, chaotic, often brutal and spiritually dim world I had so recently left behind, with its pervasive, soul-crushing pain, its frustrating, myriad limitations, its widespread spiritual blindness, and its relentless, often trivial, demands, was almost more than my newly awakened soul could bear. I want to stay here with you. The thought, the desperate silent plea, formed with an almost physical intensity within the core of my consciousness, a passionate, yearning cry to remain forever enveloped in his healing, illuminating, all-loving presence, to never again be separated from this sublime state of grace and truth. His response, when it came, was filled with an infinitely tender, divine understanding that fully acknowledged and validated the depth of my desire, yet simultaneously, gently but firmly, affirmed a different, necessary, and ultimately more purposeful path for me at this particular juncture of my eternal, ongoing soul journey. Eleanor, my beloved child, his communication was like a soft, warm blanket of pure love, enveloping my entire being, your sacred individual journey in the physical realm, with its unique, divinely orchestrated lessons, and its precious opportunities for accelerated soul growth and service to others, is not yet fully complete. There is still vital, beautiful work for you to do there. A crucial, life-giving message you must now carry back with you, like a precious, fragile flame, into the waiting darkness. The profound peace, the boundless joy, and the unconditional love you have so wonderfully experienced here are not meant to be hoarded selfishly, kept only for yourself, but are destined to be generously, courageously shared, to become a living, breathing beacon of hope, guidance, and inspiration for others who are still lost, stumbling in the pervasive spiritual darkness of the world, unconsciously, desperately yearning for the very light you have now so powerfully witnessed and so joyfully embraced. He then showed me, not in the exhaustive, panoramic style of the earlier life review, but as a series of gentle, poignant, prescient flashes of intuitive insight, the potential positive, transformative ripples, the unforeseen, grace-filled pathways of healing and awakening that my return to Earth, armed with this new consciousness, could potentially initiate. He showed me fleeting images of faces, people I did not yet know in my previous earthly life, souls who were struggling with doubt, mired in despair, searching desperately for meaning, hungry for authentic spiritual nourishment, whose lives might be unexpectedly touched, significantly changed, perhaps even profoundly, spiritually awakened by the humble, sincere, and courageous testimony I would now be empowered to bear concerning His infinite love, His universal truth, and the vibrant reality of the spiritual dimensions of existence. He helped me to understand, with a clarity that dissolved my remaining reluctance, that even a single, small, flickering light, if carried faithfully, shared courageously, and offered with pure, selfless love, could indeed dispel an astonishing, disproportionate amount of darkness in the world, far more than one might logically imagine from a limited, purely human perspective. The intense, almost overwhelming reluctance I had initially felt at the terrifying thought of returning to the limitations and suffering of earthly life began to slowly, perceptibly transform, first into a hesitant, almost mournful, yet willing acceptance, and then, gradually, with gathering momentum, into a burgeoning, almost joyful sense of sacred resolve and profound purpose. The unique mission He was so lovingly, so trustingly, entrusting to me, I began to fully realize, was not a burdensome sentence to be endured, but an incredible, unmerited honor, a sacred, once-in-an-existence privilege, a direct, conscious continuation of service to Him and to humanity on a far higher, infinitely more spiritually significant plane than I had ever conceived possible during my previous life of intellectual atheism. You will not be alone in this challenging, often misunderstood, endeavor. He assured me with a power that banished all doubt, His divine love a tangible, empowering, fortifying force that enveloped and strengthened my entire spiritual being. I will be with you always, in every step, in every breath, in every word spoken in my name, even unto the very end of the age, and beyond. When you speak my truth with sincerity, humility, and love, my spirit will indeed speak through you, touching hearts in ways you cannot predict or control. The spiritual strength you will undoubtedly need for every unforeseen trial, the divine wisdom for every crucial decision, the inspired words for every challenging encounter, all will be abundantly provided to you, moment by moment, as needed. The path forward, though it may sometimes seem obscure to your human eyes, will always be made clear, one sure step at a time. Trust in me. Trust in the indwelling power of the love you now carry within you. Then came the gentle but inexorable, unmistakable pull, a palpable sensation of being lovingly drawn back, away from the ineffable, radiant heart of the divine light. It wasn't a forceful expulsion or a sudden jarring banishment, but a tender, almost reluctant divine release, like a loving parent's hand slowly, gently letting go of a child's hand after a long, comforting, reassuring embrace, sending them forth on a new adventure. The overwhelming, direct brilliance of his immediate presence began to gradually recede, not diminishing in its intrinsic power or glory, but subtly shifting its mode of manifestation within my awareness, becoming less of an external, all-consuming phenomenon and more of an internalized, abiding, inextinguishable light within the deepest core of my transformed soul. The profound, indescribable peace, the boundless, unconditional love, the unshakable, luminous clarity, these sacred gifts remained, etched forever, indelibly, into the very fabric of my spiritual DNA, an eternal, living imprint that I knew with absolute, joyful certainty would never, ever leave me, no matter what trials or tribulations my return to earthly life might entail. My last conscious perception in that transcendent, heavenly realm, as the final diaphanous veils of ordinary earthly consciousness began to gently, inexorably descend, was his voice, his knowing, his loving, empowering promise echoing like a divine, celestial symphony within the deepest, most sacred chambers of my renewed, repurposed spirit. Go now in peace, my beloved daughter, and be an unwavering, courageous bearer of my light to a world that so desperately, so profoundly needs it. Remember always all that you have learned here. Love without limit. Forgive without hesitation. Serve without expectation of reward. For in so doing, you truly serve me, and you fulfill the deepest purpose of your existence. And with that final, loving commission, the light gently faded from my direct perception, and I was released, sent back, a changed being, to a world I would now see and engage with through entirely new, divinely illumined eyes. The transition back into my physical body was not a gentle, peaceful reawakening. It was a violent, shocking, almost brutal collision with the dense, painful, limiting reality of corporeality. One moment, I was bathed in ineffable, transcendent light, cradled in unconditional divine love. My consciousness expanded to cosmic proportions. The next, an explosion of agonizing, overwhelming sensation. My chest felt as if it were being simultaneously crushed by an immense, unyielding weight and ripped apart from within by 1,000 fiery needles. A desperate, rasping, tearing gasp, the first tortured breath of a painful, reluctant rebirth, tore through my throat, raw, ragged, and utterly inadequate. The world around me erupted in a bewildering, terrifying cacophony of harsh, metallic sounds, urgent, strained, shouted voices, and a blinding, chaotic, disorienting flickering of artificial light, the frantic, desperate, almost brutal reality of an emergency room resuscitation attempt in full, chaotic swing. I could hear those shouts, muffled and distorted at first, as if coming from underwater, then gradually growing clearer, sharper, voices laced with a mixture of intense professional concentration, controlled panic, and a dawning, almost disbelieving thread of hope. We've got a rhythm. Sinus tatch. Get the pressure up. Stats are improving. Strong, urgent, unseen hands were on me, probing, pressing, manipulating my unresponsive form. A gritty, cold oxygen mask was clamped, roughly, unceremoniously, over my face, the smell of antiseptic, stale sweat, and the faint, metallic tang of my own blood filling my nostrils with a nauseating, unwelcome familiarity. My body, so recently an irrelevance, a forgotten shell, was now a raging inferno of excruciating pain. My chest, where the initial trauma of the accident had been centered, felt like a molten cauldron of agony. My limbs, heavy and unresponsive, throbbed with a relentless fiery protest. Every single nerve ending in my battered, violated form seemed to be screaming in raw, unadulterated, simultaneous protest at this unwelcome resurrection. It was a profoundly brutal, shocking re-entry into a world I had, for a timeless, blessed, unforgettable interval, completely, gloriously transcended. Consciousness flickered precariously, a fragile, sputtering, windswept flame buffeted by a relentless storm of overwhelming pain and complete sensory overload. Through vision that swam and blurred, refusing to focus, I perceived indistinct, shadowy figures hovering above me, their faces distorted and elongated, like figures in a nightmare. Doctors, nurses, their expressions a tense, unreadable mask of intense professional focus, tinged with a dawning, almost disbelieving astonishment that eerily mirrored my own internal, spiritual shock at finding myself back in this dense, painful realm. I tried to speak, to articulate the incredible, world-shattering, life-altering experience I had just undergone, to tell them about the light, about him, about the message of love I now carried like a sacred, burning ember within my soul, but only a choked, inarticulate, pathetic groan managed to escape my unresponsive lips. The contrast was staggering, almost capable of shattering my newfound spiritual resolve, almost unbearable. From the boundless, indescribable peace and infinite, unconditional love of his divine, immediate presence, I had been violently hurled back into this raw, brutal, limiting reality of a broken, tormented physical body and the unrelenting, often savage chaos of the material world. Yet, even beneath the overwhelming, suffocating waves of physical pain, even amidst the disorienting, terrifying fog of confusion and sensory assault, the indelible, luminous imprint of that other, higher, more real realm remained, a deep, quiet, unshakable certainty, an unassailable, experiential knowing that anchored my reeling soul. I was back, and I had a message. A sacred mission, a divine purpose, given to me by the very source of all existence, and somehow, some way, I would find the strength, the courage, the words to fulfill it. The ensuing journey from the stark, sterile intensity of the emergency room to the relative quiet of the intensive care unit, and then, after days that felt like weeks, to a regular hospital room, was a protracted, disorienting blur of persistent, gnawing pain, medication-induced haziness, probing medical examinations, and fragmented, luminous, sacred memories of the light, of his face, of his words. My physical body was undeniably, severely broken, a shattered, fragile vessel that the skilled medical team fought tirelessly to mend. But my spirit, though still reeling from the profound, almost violent whiplash of transitioning between such vastly different, seemingly incompatible realms of existence, felt strangely, miraculously, whole, renewed, irrevocably transformed, imbued with a serene, unshakable, divine purpose that transcended all my immediate, overwhelming physical suffering. The attending doctors, a team of highly skilled and dedicated professionals, repeatedly referred to my unexpected survival and the relatively rapid pace of my initial recovery as a medical miracle, shaking their heads in genuine, professional disbelief. I had been, they informed me with hushed, clinical gravity, when I was more lucid, clinically dead for a significant period. My injuries from the car accident, deemed catastrophic, extensive, and by all normal medical prognoses, almost certainly unsurvivable. They spoke with a mixture of scientific curiosity and something akin to awe about the precise, almost lucky, nature of certain internal injuries that had narrowly missed being instantly fatal, about the remarkably rapid and effective medical intervention initiated by the first responders at the scene, and about the unexpected, almost inexplicable resilience of the human body when pushed far beyond its conventionally understood limits of endurance. I listened to their detailed, logical explanations with outward politeness, nodding when appropriate, but inwardly, I knew, with a certainty that resonated in the deepest, most sacred core of my being, that the true, ultimate explanation for my astonishing return to life lay far beyond the reach and scope of their commendable medical science, rooted instead in an infinite divine mercy and a sacred, specific purpose that I was only just beginning to haltingly, humbly comprehend. My partner, Thomas, his usually composed, rational face now a heart-wrenching mask of profound, sleepless anguish, barely suppressed fear, and tearful, overwhelming relief, rushed to my bedside as soon as the medical authorities deemed me stable enough for visitors. Holding his trembling hand, feeling its familiar, grounding warmth, seeing the unconditional love, the deep concern, and the lingering, haunted fear in his weary, bloodshot eyes, powerfully anchored me in the precious, fragile reality of the earthly life I had been so unexpectedly, so miraculously, so purposefully given back. But the question, the challenge, loomed before me, immense, daunting, almost overwhelming. How could I ever begin to adequately, convincingly explain to him, my staunchly atheistic, scientifically minded partner, or to anyone else for that matter, what had truly, undeniably, gloriously happened to me during those minutes when my heart had stopped and my brain had registered no activity? How could I possibly articulate in mere human words an experience so profound, so sacred, so paradigm-shattering, so utterly beyond the scope of ordinary, everyday human language and conventional, materialistic comprehension? The initial days and weeks of my recovery were an intense, multifaceted, often exhausting struggle, not just with the demanding, painful process of physical healing from grievous, life-threatening wounds, but also, and perhaps even more so, with the immense, almost overwhelming spiritual, emotional, and intellectual task of integrating the NDE, with all its radical, worldview-shattering revelations and its divine, life-altering commission, into my conscious, ongoing, earthly existence. The memories of that other, luminous realm were incredibly vivid, intensely present, almost more real, more tangible than the sterile, clinical environment of the hospital room that surrounded me. Yet, every time I attempted to describe them, even to myself, in the privacy of my own thoughts, the words felt pitifully inadequate, like trying to capture the infinite, blazing glory of a supernova in a tiny, smudged, fragile glass jar. The mundane world around me, the hushed, efficient routines of the hospital, the concerned, kindly faces of nurses and doctors, even the profound, unwavering love emanating from my anxious family and friends, seemed strangely muted, almost two-dimensional, lacking the vibrant, pulsating, multi-dimensional reality, the sheer, breathtaking aliveness, the overwhelming sense of being truly, fully home that I had so recently, so unforgettably, witnessed and been an integral, joyful part of. When I felt a modicum of physical strength return, when the heavy, disorienting fog of potent painkillers began to lift, albeit slightly, I knew I had to try to speak about it, to share the unshareable. I started, naturally, with Thomas, my life partner, the man who knew me better than anyone, the man whose intellectual skepticism mirrored what mine had once been. I fumbled for words, my voice hoarse from disuse and thick with unshed tears and overwhelming, sacred emotion, recounting the terrifying out-of-body experience, the menacing, soul-chilling darkness, the sudden, glorious, all-consuming advent of the light, the indescribable, transformative encounter with him, with Jesus, his overwhelming love, the panoramic, soul-searching, yet ultimately merciful life review, and the profound, world-altering revelations he had shared with me about the true nature of love, the spiritual underpinnings of reality, the illusion of death, and the sacred, unbreakable interconnectedness of all life. He listened with rapt, unwavering, almost painful attention, his hand never once leaving mine, his intelligent eyes searching my face, his expression a complex, unreadable tapestry of profound bewilderment, deep, anxious concern for my mental state, and a dawning, hesitant, almost fearful sense of awe. He didn't interrupt, didn't scoff, didn't immediately resort to the familiar litany of materialistic, reductionist explanations we had both so often employed in the past to dismiss such accounts. He saw the profound, undeniable, radical change in my eyes, in the very essence of my demeanor, in the quiet, unshakable serenity that now seemed to emanate from me despite my physical pain and weakness. "Eleanor," he whispered when I finally fell silent, his own voice trembling slightly, husky with emotion. "Whatever happened to you out there, when you were gone, it was real to you, wasn't it? I mean really real. I can see it in you." His cautious, hesitant, yet ultimately loving acceptance, his willingness to at least entertain the possibility that my experience was more than just a neurological event, was a healing, validating balm to my wounded, overwhelmed soul. It was a crucial, indispensable first step on what I knew would be a long, challenging, and often solitary journey of sharing a truth that the world, especially the skeptical, secular world I had once so fully inhabited, was largely unprepared and perhaps unwilling to hear. But he had given me a message, and I knew, with every fiber of my newly awakened being, that I had to find a way, his way, to deliver it. My physical recovery progressed with a speed that continued to astonish my doctors, but the internal spiritual transformation was far more significant, more all-encompassing. The doctor, Eleanor Vance, who had prided herself on her unwavering atheism, her fierce intellect, and her mastery of the rational, was slowly, irrevocably, and joyfully being reborn as someone entirely new, someone whose identity was no longer rooted in the shifting sands of human intellect or professional achievement, but in the eternal, unshakable bedrock of divine, experiential love and revealed, luminous truth. The decision to step away from my prestigious academic career, to leave behind the familiar, stimulating world of theoretical physics, was not taken lightly, nor was it an easy one. Physics had been more than just a profession. It had been my passion, my intellectual sanctuary, the very lens through which I had perceived and attempted to understand the universe for my entire adult life. But the profound, irreconcilable dissonance between the inherently limited materialistic worldview that underpinned so much of contemporary science and the boundless, spiritual, love-saturated reality I had directly, undeniably experienced in his presence was too stark, too fundamental to ignore, to compartmentalize, or to rationalize away. How could I, in good conscience, continue to teach and promote a model of the cosmos that I now knew, with every fiber of my being, to be tragically, if unintentionally, incomplete, a model that systematically excluded its very source, its ultimate meaning, its loving, conscious, divine creator? It was a deeply painful and complex process of disengagement, fraught with difficult, often awkward conversations with university deans who couldn't fully grasp the depth or nature of my transformation, and with esteemed colleagues, many of whom were dear friends, who regarded my newfound spiritual convictions with a mixture of bewilderment, concern, and, in some unfortunate cases, thinly veiled pity or outright condescension. They worried I had lost my intellectual moorings, that the trauma of the accident had unhinged my once formidable rational mind. But Thomas, my beloved Thomas, though still grappling intellectually with the immensity of what I had shared, stood by me with a quiet, unwavering loyalty and a love that transcended his own skepticism. He had witnessed firsthand the undeniable, positive change in me, the deep, serene, unshakable peace that now seemed to emanate from my very core, replacing the restless intellectual striving and subtle existential anxiety that had always characterized me before. He might not have understood it all, but he believed me, and that made all the difference. My new mission, the sacred commission he had so lovingly given me in that realm of ineffable light, began tentatively, informally, almost organically, as I simply started to share my story, my personal testimony, with small, intimate groups, with anyone who exhibited a genuine, heartfelt willingness to listen with an open, receptive heart and a curious, seeking mind. I found myself speaking in surprising venues, veterans support groups where unspoken pain and deep spiritual searching were palpable in the air, local church gatherings hungry for authentic, experiential spiritual nourishment rather than just dogma or ritual, even just with curious individuals, friends of friends, or chance acquaintances I encountered in the course of my slowly re-emerging daily life. I spoke not as a preacher, for I possessed no theological training or ecclesiastical authority, nor as a polished, persuasive orator, for I had always been a woman of precise scientific language and reserved academic demeanor, more comfortable with equations than with effusive declarations. I spoke simply, humbly, as a witness, a fellow traveler, a scientist who had inadvertently stumbled upon a truth far grander, far more profound than any she had ever sought in her laboratories or equations. A woman who had journeyed to the very brink of what she believed to be oblivion and had been miraculously, purposefully, brought back with a message not of her own making, but from the very heart of eternal love. I recounted my NDE in as much painstaking, honest detail as I could muster, struggling to find earthly words adequate to convey the ineffable, transcendent realities I had witnessed. The terrifying, soul-chilling darkness, and the malevolent entities it harbored. The sudden, glorious, all-consuming advent of the unimaginable light. The overwhelming, transformative, personal encounter with the central divine figure, with Jesus himself, and his boundless, unconditional, all-healing love. The panoramic, soul-searching, yet ultimately merciful and illuminating life review, with its painful but liberating revelations about my own life, my motivations, my impact on others, and the profound, world-altering spiritual insights he had so generously shared with me about the true loving nature of ultimate reality, the unseen spiritual underpinnings of our physical world, the grand illusion of death, and the sacred, unbreakable, joyful interconnectedness of all life, all consciousness, all creation. I spoke with a newfound, quiet conviction that often surprised even myself of the urgent, desperate need for all humanity to consciously, courageously lay down the insidious, invisible, yet incredibly destructive weapons of hatred, fear, judgment, resentment, prejudice, and cynicism that we carry so carelessly, so unconsciously, so destructively within our own hearts and minds, long before those inner states ever manifest as outer conflict, cruelty, or separation. The reactions to my testimony were, as he had gently forewarned me they would be, varied, unpredictable, and often deeply revealing of the listener's own spiritual state. Some individuals were profoundly, visibly moved, tears streaming unashamedly down their faces, their souls transparently touched, recognizing in my faltering, inadequate words a deep, unspoken, universal truth that resonated powerfully with their own innermost spiritual yearnings, their own hidden questions, their own secret hopes for something more, something real, something eternal. They asked earnest, searching, often poignant questions, shared their own personal stories of struggle, of doubt, of fleeting moments of spiritual insight, their own often frustrated search for meaning, for purpose, for an authentic, experiential connection with the divine. For these precious, receptive souls, my story, my unlikely testimony, seemed to serve as a powerful, unexpected confirmation, a tangible, relatable beacon of hope in a world so often shrouded in materialism, cynicism, doubt, and existential despair. Others, predictably, and often with a certain degree of intellectual discomfort or even veiled hostility, remain deeply, staunchly skeptical, their minds seemingly unable, or perhaps simply unwilling to stretch beyond the familiar, comfortable confines of the conventional, materialistic worldview that had, like me, before my experience, defined their entire understanding of reality. They politely, or sometimes not so politely, attributed my extraordinary experience to the well-documented and easily explainable psychological and physiological effects of severe physical trauma, to anoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain during my period of clinical death, to the mind's well-known and powerful capacity to generate vivid hallucinations or play elaborate, self-protective tricks on itself when under conditions of extreme, life-threatening duress. I met their skepticism, their often condescending explanations, not with defensiveness or intellectual argument, for I knew from my own past that intellectual debate alone could not impart the kind of profound, experiential, heart knowledge I had so miraculously received, but with the same gentle, unwavering patience and loving understanding that he had so generously, so transformatively shown to me. I couldn't, and indeed had no desire to, force belief upon anyone. I could only humbly, sincerely offer my personal testimony as a seed, plant it with unconditional love, and then trust, with a newfound, quiet faith, that the inherent, luminous truth embedded within the message itself would, in its own divine time and its own mysterious way, find its own path to the fertile, receptive ground of seeking hearts. Some of the most impactful, and for me, personally healing, conversations I had during this initial period were with other individuals who had also undergone near-death experiences or who had had other profound, unexplainable spiritual awakenings. In their eyes, in their shared understanding, I found a unique and comforting fellowship, a sense of not being entirely alone in navigating the often bewildering, challenging, yet ultimately exhilarating territory of a radically expanded consciousness. I certainly didn't possess all the answers to life's great mysteries, nor did I ever pretend to. My own understanding of the vast, multidimensional spiritual truths I had been so briefly, so intensely, privileged to glimpse was still very much evolving, deepening with each passing day, with each heartfelt conversation, with each new opportunity to reflect, to pray, and to simply be in this new, heightened state of awareness. But I held fast, with an unshakable, joyful grip, to the luminous, life-giving core of his divine message. Unconditional love is the ultimate, foundational reality, the most powerful, creative, intelligent, and healing force in the entire, infinite universe. Radical, transformative forgiveness, forgiveness of oneself as much as forgiveness of others, is absolutely essential to break the heavy, karmic chains of past pain, guilt, and resentment, and to open the heart to receive divine grace. True, lasting, inner peace, the kind of peace that surpasses all worldly understanding and turmoil, begins not in grand, external political movements or societal reforms, however well-intentioned, but silently, sacredly, powerfully, within the transformed, loving landscape of each individual human heart. Every single soul, without any exception whatsoever, is infinitely precious, a beloved, unique, irreplaceable child of the divine, intimately, eternally interconnected in a vast, intricate, luminous web of spiritual kinship, a glorious divine family. I discovered, often to my own surprise, that the most powerful and effective way to convey this life-altering, transformative message was not through eloquent rhetoric, sophisticated theological arguments, or irrefutable scientific-sounding proofs, but by simply, consistently striving, however imperfectly, however humbly, to embody in my own daily life the very same unconditional love, the profound peace, the boundless compassion, the radical forgiveness, and the joyful serenity that I had so overwhelmingly, so unforgettably, experienced in his divine, immediate presence. It was in the simple act of genuinely, deeply listening to others with an open, patient, non-judgmental heart, allowing them the sacred space to share their own pain, their own doubts, their own hopes. It was in speaking my own truth with courage, honesty, humility, and profound vulnerability without any attachment to whether it was accepted or rejected. It was in consciously, persistently making the effort to see and to honor the divine, Christ-like spark within everyone I met. Even, and perhaps especially, those who disagreed with me, those who misunderstood me, those who judged me, or those who, out of their own fear or pain, might have treated me with hostility or contempt. My life, I realized with a growing sense of awe and profound gratitude, was no longer primarily about intellectual pursuits, professional accolades, or the detached, analytical observation of a purely material cosmos. It was now joyfully, purposefully dedicated to contributing, in whatever small, humble, divinely guided way I could, to the desperately needed awakening, healing, and spiritual evolution of humanity, to the growth of divine love, profound wisdom, and compassionate understanding in a fractured, suffering, yet ultimately redeemable world. The battlefield had shifted dramatically from the abstract, theoretical realms of cosmological equations and quantum uncertainties to the far more challenging, infinitely more significant, yet ultimately sacred and rewarding landscape of the individual and collective human heart. The mission was far more demanding, far more nuanced, far more dependent on divine grace than any scientific endeavor I had ever undertaken, yet it was also, without a shadow of a doubt, infinitely more fulfilling, infinitely more aligned with the deepest, truest, most authentic longings of my newly awakened, eternally grateful soul. As I continue this unexpected, unmerited, divinely appointed journey, I recall his comforting, empowering words almost daily, like a sacred mantra. Speak what you have seen, what you have felt, what you now know. The words, the strength, the wisdom will be given to you when they are needed. And they are. Consistently, faithfully, often miraculously. Each time I summon the courage to open my heart and share my story, to bear witness to the transformative truth he so lovingly revealed to me, I feel his unmistakable, guiding presence, a quiet, inner strength, a gentle, loving reassurance, a profound confirmation that I am not, and never will be, alone in this sacred, shared endeavor. The once crippling fear of ridicule, of rejection, of intellectual dismissal has largely, wonderfully faded, replaced by an urgent, burning, joyful desire to share the boundless hope, the profound healing, and the transformative, unconditional love that I was so freely, so undeservedly, so miraculously given. My life, in its entirety, is now and forever will be a living testament to the undeniable, glorious fact that profound, radical, spiritual transformation is possible for anyone at any time, regardless of their past beliefs or disbeliefs. It is a testament that even from the deepest, darkest depths of intellectual atheism, scientific materialism, and existential despair, the eternal, invincible, all-loving light can and will emerge, shattering illusions and healing all wounds. It is a testament that divine, unconditional love is, indeed, infinitely stronger than death, immeasurably more powerful than doubt, and eternally triumphant over all the illusory forces of darkness combined. And to you, my dear friend, who are listening to or reading these words now, perhaps you too are searching for something more, something deeper, something truer than what the material world alone can offer. Perhaps you carry your own hidden wounds from life, your own unanswered existential questions, your own deep, often unarticulated longings for authentic meaning, for genuine connection, for a love that does not fail. His message of infinite love, of boundless hope, of complete healing is for you as well, right here, right now, in this very moment. Know this in the deepest core of your being. You are loved unconditionally, infinitely, eternally, just as you are, with all your perceived flaws and failings, with all your doubts and fears. You are invited, right now, to seek the eternal, indwelling light that resides within the sacred, often unexplored sanctuary of your own precious heart. You are divinely empowered, in this very moment, to choose love over fear, compassion over judgment, forgiveness over bitterness, unity over separation. The divine power to transform your own life, and by that very transformation, to contribute significantly to the healing and awakening of the world, resides patiently, lovingly, powerfully, within each and every one of us. It begins not with grand gestures or complicated theological understandings, but with a single, simple, conscious choice, a courageous, heartfelt turning of the heart towards the divine source of all love, all wisdom, all peace. My journey, from staunch intellectual atheism to profound experiential knowing, has taught me, beyond any shadow of any doubt, that authentic faith, true spirituality, is not an escape from the complexities, the challenges, and the often harsh realities of the world. Rather, it is a divine means, a sacred empowerment to engage with the world and with all beings in it more deeply, more lovingly, more compassionately, more effectively, and with infinitely greater wisdom and joy. It is not about blind, unquestioning adherence to ancient dogma or the empty, mechanical performance of outward ritual. It is about diligently, joyfully cultivating a living, breathing, dynamic, intimate, personal relationship with the divine, with the loving source of all that is. I was once a scientist, a physicist, meticulously trained to observe, to analyze, to deconstruct, and to doubt. But he, in his infinite, unsearchable wisdom and his boundless, unconditional mercy, has lovingly, patiently, transformatively called me, and is now, through this testimony, gently, lovingly calling all of us to become seekers of a higher truth, healers of a wounded world, ambassadors of divine peace, spiritual explorers armed not with the limited tools of human intellect alone, but with the invincible, all-conquering power of a transformed, divinely illumined heart, a compelling, life-changing story, a message of eternal, boundless hope, and a living, breathing testament to the enduring, all-sufficient, all-embracing, and ultimately triumphant power of divine, unconditional love. And that, I now know, with every fiber of my redeemed, grateful being, is a sacred, joyful mission I will humbly, faithfully, courageously serve for all the rest of my earthly days, and, by His grace, into the boundless wonders of eternity.